This is Nate Bresnow. My presentation today is an example of research and presentation of results for bachelor students studying social science. In particular, for those attending my 5th semester BA seminar, Social Welfare States, Retrenchment, Liberalization, and Increasing Inequalities, at the University of Mannheim. The topic of income inequality and the role of the state dates back to the beginnings of social science with the work of Karl Marx on mass capital accumulation. Differences between rich and poor is a topic of great public concern and was a catalyst for many bloody revolutions throughout history. Income inequality rose for several decades recently. In fact, as the work of Piketty and colleagues demonstrates, income and wealth inequality levels are quickly approaching those that existed before the world wars and before the advent of liberal democratic states. The forces of economic globalization and financialization work across the globe to reshape income distributions, allowing those already in advantaged positions to further concentrate their incomes, and those in disadvantaged positions to become trapped, working for low wages. Low wage levels guaranteed by competition from potential workers in other countries. Moreover, within countries, the welfare state and labor markets changed substantially since the golden age of post-war growth and equality. Now, the internal divide between secure insider jobs with healthy benefits and outsider jobs with low wages and little security deepens in many countries. More and more women enter the labor market, but find their common occupations marginalized and precarious. In general, population aging and neoliberal economic thought led to welfare state retrenchments, less benefits guaranteed by the state for all of its residents and workers and their families, all of this contributing to greater income inequality. Richer people depend more on capital investment for their incomes, while poorer people depend entirely on wage labor. When returns on capital investments are larger than returns to wage labor, those earning income from capital take in greater relative returns over time. This means not only an income gap between capital and labor, but one that increases as time passes. As the income inequality gap increases, societies undergo dramatic changes. One of the most striking is that productivity declines. Also, resources become segregated and privatized. There is less and less access to society's resources by members of the general public. These are instead restricted to closed elite networks. What happens is a reduction in social mobility. Members of lower income classes and their offspring do not have the resources to advance to higher income classes. As Alan Kruger argues, those with the highest incomes shape policy and markets to their favor. As a result, those in lower income classes face stagnant or declining wages, as shown in the graphic to the right, based on United States Census data. The state has essentially two options for preventing the concentration of income and wealth toward the top of the distribution. One is taxes. Taking a progressive or even a simple flat rate tax and then spending the money on any public goods is redistributive because the rich pay a larger absolute share of most forms of taxes. The other option is social welfare, where the state spends specifically on those who need it. This is not only benefits for those sick or impoverished, but also applies to insurance against social risks, such as getting old and exiting the labor force, or experiencing involuntary unemployment. Currently, most welfare states reduce income inequality through taxes and transfers. This means that the post-tax and transfer incomes of individuals are more equal than the pre-tax and transfer incomes. And this equality is a function of the size of the tax and welfare state. However, those with higher incomes can improve their own incomes over time, regardless of taxes or spending, something often referred to as the Matthew effect, Their resources give themselves and their offspring greater access to human and social capital, even if those resources are routinely taxed and redistributed. Thus, simply redistributing income through taxes and transfers does not necessarily generate a sustainable income distribution equalization. It is through investment in education, training, child development, and lower income classes' exchangeable knowledge and labor that gives them the social mobility necessary to compete with those already in more advantaged classes. Based on this discussion, I make the following two assumptions before deriving my hypotheses. The first is that pre-tax income is a better indicator of social equality than post-tax and transfer income. Pre-tax income signals the institutionalized nature of inequality in a society. The second is that states that tax more spend more redistributively, so that the lower income classes benefit more than the higher income classes, at least relatively so. With these assumptions, I predict that higher tax revenues reduce income inequality, that's H1. That higher welfare state spending also reduces income inequality, H2. And finally, that states with the highest combined levels of taxing and social spending are the most equal as a result, H3. To carry out tests of these hypotheses, I employ three measures taken from secondary data. For tax revenue, I use World Bank data on all compulsory forms of taxes taken by the federal government, measured as a percent of gross domestic product, or GDP. For social spending, I use the OECD's social expenditures variable, covering public welfare state expenditures as a percent of GDP. Finally, I use the World Wealth and Income data to measure the share of the income distribution held by the highest 10% of earners. Using all countries with available data on all three measures, I have 20 rich democratic welfare states measured from 1980 to 2010. I select this period in part for data availability reasons. But it is also a period to address my research questions because it marks the neoliberal era, an era fostered in by the elections of Reagan, Thatcher, and Kohl, and a new approach to economic policy that was diffusing throughout most of the globe during the 1980s. The specific tests for H1 and H2 are to look at the correlation of tax and spending from 5 years prior with top 10% income share at present. Taking measures from 5 years prior follows the theory that tax and spending institutionalizes inequality over time, not just at a given moment. This means that it takes time for the impact of taxing and spending to shape the chances of lower income classes in the labor market and in their social welfare in general. Next, I look at the average level of tax and spending in each country as a combined measure and how this associates with income inequality. Part of the logic behind H3 is that some countries tax more while other countries spend more, yet the combined effect should give the greatest insight into income inequality. Looking at all country time points, there is a substantial negative correlation between tax revenue at T-5, or 5 years ago, and top 10% income share, as represented by the black dotted line in Figure 1. It is nearly halfway to a perfect linear correlation, which would be -1, at -0.49. A similar correlation exists for social spending, albeit slightly smaller at -0.39. These results are initial evidence supporting both H1 and H2. In order to show that the variation in income inequality between countries is behind the correlation I observe, I collapse each country to its mean. The resulting correlation only derives from differences between countries, as shown in Figure 3. The result is the same. More tax revenue in a society, for example in Sweden, Norway, New Zealand, and Denmark, explains lower income concentration, whereas less tax revenue, for example in the USA, Japan, Switzerland, and Germany, explains higher income concentration. A similar story emerges with social spending. Here, Korea is a bit of an outlier, but the pattern holds with or without Korea, as I show in Appendix A for those interested. Importantly, more spending in countries like France and Sweden explains lower income concentration, and vice versa for less spending in countries such as the USA and Japan. Looking at tax and spending combined in each country reveals a striking pattern. In Figure 5, the top 10% income share goes from highest to lowest, moving from left to right. This is shown with the blue striped bars. The USA and Korea are the most unequal, while Norway and Denmark are the most equal, on average between 2000 and 2010. The dark gray bars represent the average of tax revenue and spending as a percentage of GDP, and this increases from left to right. Although not perfectly linear, the dark gray dotted line is the fitted trend of taxes and spending across these countries, which clearly increases from left to right. Meanwhile, the blue dotted line is the linear trend for income concentration, clearly going down from left to right. This is support of H3. Now it is beyond my expectations that bachelor students run multiple regression, at least in this course. However, just to make my point further, I run a regression with both tax revenue and social spending as independent variables, predicting top 10% income share. The result is that they both exhibit large standardized effects. That's with or without Korea in the sample. I present this in Appendix A. Based on these data, I conclude that both tax revenue and social spending matter for the distribution of pre-tax income 5 years later. I should state here that both tax and spending measured in the same year also show similar negative patterns, but not quite as strong as when lagged by 5 years, as I've done in this study. I am aware of limitations to this research. For example, tax and spending are heterogeneous across domains. The level of income, estate, value added, or corporate taxes, for example, is very diverse across countries. The same is true of social spending, such as on pensions, healthcare, or unemployment. Here I lump domains together, and this potentially misses a deeper reality with more nuance explaining income inequality. Also, what is not included in social spending is education spending, and this arguably matters a great deal for giving the lower income classes chances for upward mobility. It is likely that some areas such as estate taxes or education spending might matter much more than others, and my measures here cannot capture this. These results explain only variation in income inequality between countries. In order to point more at a causal effect of taxes and spending, looking in depth at single countries over time would be helpful in future research. Finally, the impact of globalization and financialization may also be diverse across countries. This potentially diverse impact is not captured in these models and could be a confounding factor that warrants further research. The implication of this research is that although taxes and transfers have an immediate impact on income redistribution, sustainable changes to income inequality only take place over longer periods of time. There is a deeper institutionalized form of income inequality beyond what appears on tax returns. Therefore, knowing about the indirect impact of taxes and spending through reduction of wealth concentration and thus power in the hands of the rich, and offering opportunities to the lower income classes in the form of education or labor market upskilling so that they may compete and become socially mobile, gives a more holistic picture of social inequality and its causes, and a better test of the impact of the state and its practices of taking and giving. This research suggests that institutionalized and perhaps even culturally embedded aspects of inequality make lasting changes difficult. Perhaps we have underestimated the degree to which neoliberal values pervade all aspects of socioeconomic life. A remaining question is where best to put tax monies. In the USA, tax monies are stripped from public education, and the result seems to be a worsening of the conditions of those who cannot afford private education. But the picture is certainly complex. Blindly throwing money at problems may not have any sustainable impact. The final, perhaps burning question is whether we are interested in equality in the first place. Is equality a defensible or inalienable right, or simply a normative position? The breakdown of productivity and the risk of war as a result of too much inequality are certainly legitimate concerns. But what is too much inequality? Here are the references. You may follow the links and download this entire presentation on my professional website by following the link below this video. The full version of the presentation includes the endnotes and Appendix A. I thank you for your attention to this presentation, and to my bachelor students, I wish you good luck and good science in your efforts.